right. Welcome to First Impressions, the podcast where we talk about our love for Jane Austen and give a big middle finger to all those haters. I am Kristen, and I am joined today by Sarah Rose Kearns, who goes by Rose. She is my Twitter friend that I am talking to right now live for the first time, and I'm super excited about it. Hi, Rose.
Hello. It's so great to speak to you face to face.
I know.
Virtual face to face. Yes.
Yeah, with the video on, and it's just, it's wonderful to see you. I thought I would just give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience.
So I go by Rose. I live just outside New York City. I'm a playwright and an actor. I have written a stage adaptation of Persuasion. That was my first play, it was going to be produced last fall, postponed a year due to the pandemic, hopefully on for this fall, depending on how the regulations, vaccine rollout goes. And I'm a longtime reader of Jane Austen and pretty engaged with JASNA and online Jane Austen communities, and met a lot of really lovely people.
Yes, that we were just talking about how wonderful the Jane Austen community is online. And I just feel so thankful to have been connected to you and so many other people who form this really warm, supportive community where we can all share a love of the books and talk over certain elements of it, which are really fascinating. I feel like I've really learned from your insights as well. We were talking about the other day, letters in Jane Austen and who they were shared with and why. I mean, that was a fascinating conversation. Obviously Twitter has its downsides, but it has its real upsides in our lives.
It really does. Yeah. And hearing from so many scholars who are interested in sharing their perspective based on having read deeply in many 18th century texts that I have not yet embarked upon. That was really neat. There's so many, and I guess that's something about Austen's work, is that she has this real fan base and emotional appeal to the reader, and then she's also just very intellectually interesting, and so there's a kind of crossover of these sort of two modes in the way people engage with her that I find really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, she speaks to you on an emotional level, intellectually. There's history, there's the romance,
and the comedy, of course.
And the comedy, right? So there's always something you can get out of it going back to it, and I agree. And in the community, we've got Helena Kelly, who wrote The Secret Radical. We've got Devaney Lozer, who's written many valuable works on Austen, and they, sometimes pop in to the conversation. We have Deborah Yaffe, who's a blogger, and Margaret Sullivan. I'm sure there are people I'm leaving out, but when you hear about all these big names, Bianca Hernandez, right? Austen. They're big deal fans, as Maggie would say if she was here. They're the luminaries, and you could just get on and talk to them. And it's just so cool and have these relationships.
Yeah, we're all nerds together.
We're all nerds together, and it's wonderful. And it's why, it's why I had to start the podcast way back when, is because I wasn't part of a community like this, and it was very, very frustrating because that has to go somewhere. Sometimes you love something so much it has to go somewhere, and we can all enjoy it and together. So I would love to ask you, I was fascinated when I realized that, because when we started to interact on Twitter, I believe your Twitter handle just said Persuasion.
Yes. So this was a sort of online performance art project that I started and then abandoned, and I've been meaning to resume it again. But I was tweeting out a sentence a day of Persuasion. There's a bot that does a line, 180 characters or so of Jane Austen's texts every 15 minutes. So it was kind of an impulse to do something similar to that. And I haven't done it recently. But yes, that was the original purpose of my Twitter account. And then I sort of got sucked in to becoming more personal and engaging with people more on a not just strictly quoting Austen text.
Yeah, because you almost can't help it sometimes. If you're reading other people's tweets, then you want to engage.
I know, and I noticed you recently changed your name from First Impressions to include your first name.
I did do that, and I think that was important because I realized when I was going around and liking people's tweets and trying to interact with them, that it might seem kind of advertising or almost spammy, like, look at me, I'm a podcast, follow me. And also, people don't know who they're interacting with. And so I wanted to seem like a real person. So I did that. And it was kind of modeled on what you did. I was like, Sarah can be, talk about her work and be Rose. Sorry, already slipped up.
No, it's quite all right.
And she can be Rose when she wants to be. And so I thought that would be good. And also Maggie is just not on the Twitter. She is full on Facebook person. And so it's like, now we have our different channels. If you want to know what's up with Maggie, follow the Facebook. I do the email and the Twitter. So it's like,
okay. I'll have to, for first impressions, there's the Facebook. I haven't checked that out yet.
That's okay. And, it's not very active, and especially not very active right now, or when busy things are going on in our lives. So you wouldn't expect something very erudite on there. It's more like we're sharing a meme that we saw, but it's a fun space because people get on and you start to know their names, and they're your listeners who will always be there. And when Maggie got married, when she got engaged, when she had her baby, everybody got to come on and congratulate her, and we just got to share in that. So it's our little community of people who know. And I will tell you something else about that community. And I tweeted about this the other night and then immediately deleted it because I just lost my nerve. But the people who've been listening to the podcast all along have heard about one of the reasons I founded the podcast is about my own mental health struggles, right? So it's about Austen and mental health. So there are people who actually know. They're the people in my life who actually can know about my mental health diagnoses, whereas I can't share that out at work. Close friends and family, many of them don't know, and some of them do not want to talk about it in a way that can feel very invalidating, or they want to tell me that I'm not sick because they want to believe that, because it's inconvenient for them to have to deal with me maybe not being well. Or not inconvenient, but it's upsetting, right?
Yeah.
Depending on who the person is, right? And so if I can come on and have this community that I've shared all this with, we've established a connection that is like a friendship, and they are supportive. And, if I can say, I'm hypomanic this month, the only place I feel comfortable saying that is on my Twitter, on my Jane Austen Twitter.
Yeah.
I've taken that community, I've co-opted it, and I've made it my mental health. All these people are my therapists now, or at least cheering for me. And sometimes you really need to have people cheering for you. And that's what the Austen community does, for all of us. People cheer you on. And I'm sure that you've experienced the same thing.
I have. Yeah. You were saying before we started recording that there are sort of perils and downsides to the way social media rules our lives to some degree nowadays, or the way people communicate on the internet isn't it's not always an unqualified good, but I really do think it is a good. And especially in the last year during the pandemic, I felt like, it's the sort of online friends that I have in the community. It's a big part of my identity. And especially as the circle of people that I'm seeing in person has been so much more narrow than usual. It's not just about, there's something about group energy that can be really lovely.
Yeah.
That it's not only about one-on-one friendships, although those are very good too.
Yeah.
But the sense of having a community of people, a multiplicity of people that, as you said, are cheering you on and think the same memes are funny and are interested in chiming in really obscure discussions about nuances of the social etiquette in Austen's world. Like, there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah. And if someone makes a good joke, we're all laughing together. You're in a big room of people. You just said something funny at a party. What's more validating than that? And I have to say, Rose, you are like my number one cheerleader. When I think something is funny and I post it, you are so good.
Oh, well, I think your memes are on point. I'm always very impressed with your work.
Not only do you like it, but you respond with an emoji, like a laughing emoji. And that makes me like, yes,
I'm so
I did
glad.
really well. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah, you did a whole Mansfield Park series.
Oh God,
a while ago. They were
so
excellent.
silly. That was before Christmas, I believe. And it was just like I had a riff, and some people I do have a Twitter follower, Kate, who liked one of my tweets and meme. And so she was like, I didn't really get the Mansfield Park ones, but this one is funny. And I was like, Kate, somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to make trash Mansfield Park memes off the cuff. And I'm proud of what I've done. My contribution to the Austen
to the discourse.
To the discourse TM, right? Yeah. Well, some of those suckers were really funny. And then I did one series that almost got no love at all, which was tweets or memes as though I was Mr. Woodhouse. And it was that meme that was like hard to swallow pills. You know, it's just a cartoon of pills on a hand. And I wrote, sometimes it snows as the hard to swallow pill. I was like, this stuff is gold.
It's niche. It's niche, but if you get it, you get it.
Exactly. So I would love to delve a little deeper into your work adapting Persuasion. Do you want to just start off by sharing why Persuasion, why you have such a close relationship with it?
Yeah. Well, so Persuasion was the first Austen novel that I really fell in love with. I started reading her pretty young. I think my cousins came and stayed with us, and they gave me a copy of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice when I was 11 or 12, and I sort of struggled through both of those, but it was sort of it was just at the level of reading that I could comprehend at that time. So it was I liked it, but I wasn't reading it for pleasure entirely. And then a year or two later, I picked up Persuasion of my own accord. And I guess I was ready for it, for Austen at that time. And it really imprinted on me. I've always felt very identified with Anne Elliot, which seems like sort of a pretentious thing to say because I think she's so cool. And it's not like, I don't share life circumstances with her, but, she's just one heroine that really does it for me.
Is it her the sort of introspection, her ability to see it all, and like that elegance of mind? As it says?
It is. One thing that I find really interesting about the way she's portrayed is she's both very comfortable with herself and also very kind and tolerant in her attitude toward other people. The way that she thinks about the Miss Musgroves, that she's not really jealous of them. She's sad that Captain Wentworth is flirting with them, or she wishes she had a sister that she was as close to as they are to each other. But she has a kindly attitude to them that is, I think, kind of lovely and admirable. And the fact that she doesn't get a lot of external validation from her social world.
Yeah.
And yet she really, on the whole, I think, has a strong sense of self and self-worth. I think there are times when, she's hard on herself, or she's sort of trying to control her emotional reactions in a way that is not nice, maybe not kind to herself, but
not healthy, really. But
not healthy.
That's our modern perspective, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's there in the text too.
Yeah, that's very true.
But I think that at the core of it, she's comfortable with who she is, even without having, for most of the story, anybody that she can open her heart to unreservedly. That's really a kind of strength and gentleness, as the phrase goes.
And that's how you saw yourself, or you wanted to be, or you related.
I suppose is how I wanted to be. Yeah.
I mean, yes. And I always found it so striking when you read all the novels, all of the heroines have at least one strong female friendship, and that desolation of Anne being alone in an island where she doesn't have that, it really hits you hard when you're used to going into Austen's world and used to having a female friend and confidant. And when you identify with the heroine, you're like, at least we got that going for us. We got a support system here. When you're alone with Anne reading Persuasion, you do not have the support system. as a reader. you're
Interesting.
Like,
Yeah.
you're like going along with her.
I suppose, would you say that's the same as Fanny Price, though?
Oh, you're absolutely
I suppose it's interesting. Both of them are really into poetry. They quote poetry in their head when they're bored.
That's so true. That's so true. And with Fanny Price, she almost has that support in Edmund in a way, although that's unhealthy in and of itself too. And William, right? She doesn't have the female.
She does
friend.
have William.
She does have William, and but he's just not around. And
right.
And with
Anne doesn't have a William.
She doesn't. When Mrs. Smith is in the story, you don't quite feel that you get that female friendship, and I think it's purposeful, right? Because she does almost let Anne step off that cliff of getting engaged.
Yeah. What do you make of Mrs. Smith as a reader? Apparently, there's a letter from after Austen had finished her draft of Persuasion where she says to Fanny Knight something like, I have something ready for publication. And many scholars, including Juliet Wells, whom I admire very much, have said, this means she was done with Persuasion. But it seems to me that it's hard to read Persuasion after reading Emma, which is so fully fleshed out all the way through, and think that she wouldn't have made some tweaks to Volume 2 if she'd had more time.
I mean, it's so interesting to read that canceled chapters, and realize that she had to workshop it with Cassandra. And it says something's not quite there. And then she comes up with this letter, she comes out with the, one of the most beloved and romantic moments in English literature. And it's like, I love that you were like, something's not quite perfect. I'm going to put the finishing touches on it. And then
tame and flat. I think that's what she said. Yeah.
Oh, really tame and flat. Oh, yeah. And this Mantua maker, that I keep referencing, like, listeners, if you haven't read the canceled chapters of Persuasion, give them a look. And there's a feeling almost of when Charles Musgrove comes in and tells his mother when they're staying at the inn, he tells his mother, Mrs. Musgrove, oh, I booked us a box at the play for Tuesday night. It almost feels like a setup for an event that does not happen.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in those terms.
Yeah, it's like weird dialogue that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
And there's not much of that in Austen's work.
No, it's not. I mean, it's funny, the exchange with Charles and Mary there about the he's insisting that he'll go to the play without her, and she wants to go to the evening party, but she also wants to go to the play.
That's
but no, that's interesting. Yeah, I wonder if Austen ever envisioned Anne and Wentworth getting together at the theater. That's kind of an
yes, because she's acting just like Fanny is acting, right? Like they're both acting a part or whatever. Yeah. I wonder if she envisioned that, because that tie into the theater would be a really interesting twist. I will admit, as the first time when I read it for the first time, I didn't know, I had never seen an adaptation. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I definitely felt, there's going to be some kind of mix-up or misunderstanding, and it's all going to get resolved at the play. And then like almost immediately the letter comes out, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like Wentworth is like, Anne is Harville are like standing around having this conversation, right? As far as the female friendships and the isolation, I understand what you're saying, like identifying with that. I find it a hard read, but you're absolutely right. And one thing I'll say is she does not blame herself for saying no. She thinks back to it and she says, in the situation I was in, with the information I had, I was being dutiful. I was respecting Lady Russell's opinion. There was a very good reason for me not to accept him. She doesn't like berate herself for not doing it.
She doesn't. And, it's interesting because Austen does really seem to equivocate in this novel about whether or not it's okay for children to marry people their parents don't approve of. Like she's kind of threading the needle, trying to not make a statement about that. It seems to me about that deeply controversial political issue. But yeah, I love that at the end, Anne says, I felt that I had to listen to Lady Russell. And in a way, it's sort of as if she's giving herself less agency when she thinks back to
Yes.
19-year-old self. But also, she's saying, Frederick, I disagree with you about this whole scenario. Like, I'm not going to submit to your idea of what my duty was. I'm going to hold my own with respect to this. And, I'm not going to come into this marriage being like, I was wrong.
My bad.
I'm so sorry. And, I so appreciate your still wanting me, even though I'm 27 and very, very old.
I think in that final conversation, he admits, right, that he comes to respect her point of view, and
they agree to disagree.
Yeah. And,
in a really way that's really interesting, I think, as a couple, right? They are able to, he's sort of able to, she sets this boundary and he respects it.
The metaphor of Louisa jumping and him not being able to catch her, I think is so powerful, because what he was asking Anne to do was jump without a net, possibly change her life, lose her status, become a penniless war widow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were so many perils in what he was asking her
like
to
that.
do.
I haven't really heard people discuss it in that way as a parallel to what he was asking Anne to do. I love that. Actually, in my play version, I gave Lady Russell a line of dialogue. There's sort of a flashback to 1806 when they're discussing the engagement, and Lady Russell says, among other things, look before you leap, which I considered as sort of a bad pun, and no one's commented on it.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your drawing that out.
I love that so much. Like, before you leave, yes, this is exactly what she was doing. And the unreasonableness of him to think, in the beginning, it's just like, he was lucky. He'd always been lucky. And that's what he's basing this whole thing on. And it's like, no, this is not how the world works. And to be so ungenerous as to not forgive her for so long. I've never forgiven him. I never can totally get on board with him as a character, because when you love someone, right, the ideal of what I would think of is I want someone to love me enough to forgive me earlier than 7 years, you know what I mean, for something I did that hurt them, well,
it's sort of peculiar that they never worked out how to have a long-term engagement or some kind of conditional understanding, as the term of the day went. It seems that it's interesting that Austen sort of elides that. She doesn't, that whole backstory is given in a few paragraphs of narration. We don't get a lot of detail. We don't get a flashback in the novel. And it really seems like there was some kind of miscommunication.
It really does.
Perhaps, like Anne is saying, I can't get married unless we have some savings. There's no birth control in this world. There's no Social Security, right? I don't want to end up like Fanny Price's mother.
Right.
So let's hold off. And he took that as her rejecting him as a person and thinking that he wasn't good enough for her.
And we learned that about him. We learned he's so hot-headed, right, as a person, that I imagine if she had said, well, let's just cautiously get engaged, he would still be just as pissed off. He still has this value in this idea of what his future is going to hold. And
well, yeah. Well, she did presumably break the engagement. I mean, that's one thing you asked me in your show notes about adaptations, and one thing that I find perplexing about both movie versions of Persuasion is that they refer to it as she refused his proposal, but actually she said yes and then took it back, which is much more hurtful.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems that if Lady Russell had maybe been a bit more sympathetic, or if Anne had more support from her family, she could have, I don't know, they could have done something that was kind of in between this black and white.
I almost wish Lady Russell could have sat him down and, as a person who loves Anne, paint a picture for him. Because if it's coming directly from Anne, all he's hearing is, no, it's not good. You're not good enough. Right. And if it's coming from someone who's practically saying, do you understand what you're really asking her to do and the consequences of this? Maybe he would have listened, but we're supposed to love him like in the book, it says Anne could love a person who sometimes did a hasty or imprudent thing or whatever, because it shows your heart. Yes, he has a lot of heart, but that bit him,
Yeah, it did.
It bit them both.
We have to remember too that Lady Russell doesn't like him as a person.
That's true.
It seems by the end of the novel, the narrator tells us that she will grow to like him.
Yeah, right.
Throughout the whole 1806 to 1815 period, she has been thinking of him as, some kind of con man, essentially, right?
Yeah,
the narrator says that he was witty, he was headstrong. Lady Russell distrusted wit and had of anything approaching imprudence a horror.
Yes.
Right? She sees him. She pegs him as an untrustworthy guy early on, in a way that is, I think, maybe even beyond what is a fair assessment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And on the other hand, I would say as a mother figure to Anne, can you really blame her?
No.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit Mrs. Bennett, right? She's like, we need to get you a good match because that's the way of the world. And then she's like, oh, Charles Musgrove would have worked out great. It's just the emphasis on love was not there. And that's always that's the core of what Austen's trying to communicate to others in her world. I always feel as if she's saying, you're asking me to find the impossible dream of a man who I love, who also has money. And that is just not gonna happen. That's like not what happens in 99% of cases. You're saying, I can't marry a man I love, but I shouldn't morally marry a man for his money. And I don't have any opportunities, like, I forget why I even started talking about this, but anyway, it's at the core of all these stories is love or money, love or money, love or money. And this is just no different than that.
Because marriage is the only respectable provision for well-educated women of small fortune, right? As we get very explicitly in Pride and Prejudice, the economic matters are intimately tied to marriage for women in this class. And yet the culture was, over the course of the 18th century, and especially in the period that Austen's work was coming out, shifting towards a more romantic view and more of a prioritization of sensibility and companionate marriage and all that, which would become true love by the Victorian era. And so figuring out how to walk that balance it seems to be something that really interested Austen throughout her career as a writer, and also, in what we know of her personal life. Actually, that brings me, if you don't mind,
please.
that brings me to my other play that I wanted to mention. I have a one-act called Manydown, which is about Jane and Cassandra Austen and the night of the Harris Bigwither proposal. And we're going to be recording it in a studio in a couple of weeks and presenting it as a radio play for the Jane Austen summer program. The University of North Carolina program is part of their entertainment this year.
It's so cool. I'm so excited for you. That is so awesome and a great opportunity.
It's been really fun. I've been working with my scene partner, Laura Rocklin, for the first time we workshopped it was January 2019. And we've had, over the last couple of years, we've gotten the opportunity to do a couple of different readings and, develop the project. And I'm excited.
Can you share like the inspiration for that? What was your light bulb where you're like, I'm going to write about this night?
Oh yeah. So, it's just, as your listeners may know, Jane Austen made this fatal decision, just like many of her characters one night in December 1802. Although her story ended up differently than many of the fictional versions, in that she never married and wrote deathless novels instead. But she accepted a proposal from a wealthy family friend. And then the next morning she said, changed my mind, sorry. Never mind.
Go through with it.
Yeah, can't go through with that.
She had her very own, like you were saying, choice between love and money. Right?
Yeah, love and money, and also more, more complicated factors too. Like Harris Bigwither he had several older sisters. 3 of them were close friends of Jane and Cassandra, the 3 that were closest in age to them. He was in their home county. They would have been near the place where they grew up. They would have had a settled home. It was not merely commercial, but also a sort of idea of I can picture her thinking that bringing her family together with this family would be good for a whole community of people and provide, emotional and financial stability to both families. Yeah, but she decided to take a chance
and
and say no, and also risk ruining her relationship with this family that's been in her life for a really long time. Although I think that she and Cassandra did stay friendly with the big sisters.
I think they did. I think there's some reference in her letter, some oblique reference where it's like wanting to make sure that they don't offend. I mean, I think so. Honestly, I think about that night a lot more often than we talk about that night in the Austen community. And I don't know really why that is, or maybe I've just lost the plot and I don't see people talking about that, or I've missed presentations about what happened. But it grieves me to the soul to think that she faced the exact same dilemma as an Austen heroine, and had to make this heart-wrenching decision. And I just can't imagine, I can't imagine. I guess that's the problem. Imagining the conversation in her head, and the conversation that she would want to have with Cassandra, and him, just imagining him, like, what was he like, and so you've done all that. You've imagined all of these things. And I would be absolutely fascinated to see the production.
Thank you. Well, I'll let you know. So our radio play version will be presented at this conference in June, and then I think it'll be available elsewhere after that. So I'll let you know when the time comes.
And which conference is it? Just for the
that is the Jane Austen Summer Program at the University of North Carolina. It's a 4-day annual symposium. It's usually they rotate through one of Austen's novels as the theme for the year. This summer, it is online because of the pandemic, and instead of focusing on one of the novels, the theme is Jane Austen's world. So it's all about life and times. We'll be discussing Claire Tomalin's biography of Austen and the letters, and different fictionalized interpretations, such as my own, of her life and personality. And it sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I've attended that conference twice before, and it was really fun. It's a little bit similar to the JASNA AGM, but it is much smaller. I think when it's in person anyway, I think they capped it at like 150 people, and they have small group discussions after every lecture. So you really get to know people. It's lovely. It's lovely. It's not the same as the AGM. It's its own thing, and they're both fun.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Kevin, my husband, Kevin, when he came across it, and he didn't realize it was online. And actually I didn't either. So his parents live in North Carolina. So he was pushing me, we got to go. And it kind of shut him down. So maybe I can still attend, since it's
so this year is online, and then I assume they'll be going back to in person for 2022.
And is the JASNA AGM, is that also going to be online this year?
That, I believe they have not announced it yet.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was online. The Chicago region is planning it, but I think they're still sort of holding out hope that they might be able to do it in person. It would be in the fall.
Yeah. Maggie and I had a dream that we were going to do it, and because my other deal is that I'm sort of a climate worrier, and I had taken a vow not to fly and so I was going to have to ride this train, the California Zephyr, across the United States to try to make it work. And so I don't know, I guess maybe I've paid for like the sins of the past by not flying at all in 2020. So I get an extra free carbon credit. That's when you start equivocating like that. You just give yourself a pass to do all kinds of things. And anyway, I don't know why I started talking about that.
Well, so after this coming year, it's Chicago, and then I believe the next one is Victoria, British Columbia, which is a little bit nearer to you. And then Colorado, I don't remember what city.
Yay!
So yeah,
West Coast, yay!
Yeah. I think they try. It's done annually on the basis of proposals submitted by the local regions, but I think they seem to try to mix it up.
Yeah,
and provide different,
so everyone has a chance. And I would love to see more virtual options stick around going forward for the people who don't have the means or or capability to travel.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was thinking, I'm sure that the process of setting up live streaming for something like that would be complicated, but it, I don't think it would diminish demand for the
No,
in-person
no.
attendance. You know,
Mm-mm.
one of the things about the JASNA AGM is that you have to register within the minute that the tickets
Yeah.
go on sale. Every year,
Yep.
there's, you know, it depending on, you know, how much capacity they have in the space that they're using. It's usually like between 500 and 800 people can go, and there's always a wait list that's at least that long.
Yeah.
So it would be great to have a virtual option for that reason, for accessibility. But I think that if I had the time and money, I would want to go in person anyway.
Yes.
Like I wouldn't, it wouldn't be a substitute. It wouldn't,
They're very
you know,
different
undermine the
experiences.
experience in any
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
They're very different experiences for sure. Yeah. So, do you mind if we return for a second to your adaptation of Persuasion?
Yeah.
If you're willing to share how the sausage was made, so to speak, what were your dark nights of the soul when you were writing this adaptation? How to handle X, how to write
Uh-huh.
this, how to frame this, you know, how to deal with this character, what to cut.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, so first of all, Persuasion was my first full length play that I ever wrote. So I started off blithely not knowing what I didn't know.
Mhm.
And the first draft was about 4 hours long. And actually, it is pretty much, the current version is pretty much the same structure at about half that length. And I think most of what I have cut has been within the dialogue. I wanted to use a lot of Austen's dialogue, as one does, because it's brilliant. But one thing that I have learned is that even, you know, she's a fairly succinct writer, but even succinct as she is, you need fewer words to express something on the stage than you do on the
Mhm,
page, because you
mhm,
have so many nonverbal cues.
mhm.
So everybody's speaking about half the sentences, half the number of sentences that they were in my first draft. One thing that I did cut that we were touching on earlier is Mrs. Smith. Sorry for spoilers for anyone who's planning to come see my play whenever the theater life resumes. But I felt that I broke the acts with the same place the volumes break in the
Oh,
novel. So volume one ends with Louisa's fall and people dealing with the aftermath of that, and then volume two and goes to Bath. And once we get to Bath, we have Mr. Elliot, we have the Dalrymples, we're getting reacquainted with Sir Walter and Elizabeth and Mrs. Clay, whom we haven't seen since the very beginning. And I felt like it was too much to introduce another character and another sort of subplot
Mhm.
at that point. And then also, I decided that I didn't really. And I guess this goes back to what I was saying about how I feel like she's not fully integrated into the narrative in the novel as it stands, because Anne makes her decision that she doesn't want to marry Mr. Elliot before she hears his evil backstory, it's almost not really relevant.
Mhm.
One thing that Mrs. Smith does, which is lovely, she gives Anne the opportunity to stand up to her father, right? Anne says, "I'm going to go visit my friend, even though you want me to go to this other party with our grand connections, and
Yeah.
but I have a prior engagement. I'm going to stick to that," which is nice, sort of reversal of what happened with Frederick back in 1806. But yeah, I ultimately decided that we didn't need to know just what a bad guy Mr. Elliot is. I kind of threw it in there in another context, that it was sort of implied that he does not have purely disinterested motives in his pursuit of Anne. But you know, Mr. Elliot is. It's one thing that's really interesting about Anne as a character too, is that she's never taken in by Mr. Elliot, right?
Yeah. Yes.
She's like, okay, he's more interesting to talk to than many of the people that I see,
Around
but
me.
you know, he's not doing anything for me. He's not Wickham. He's not Willoughby,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
She
Yes.
has the maturity and insight to feel like something is off,
Yes.
and she decides within herself that even if she never sees Captain Wentworth again, she's not really interested in marrying him. It seems to me that Mr. Elliot's function in the plot is more as a sort of obstacle on Wentworth's sort of moral journey to getting a more accurate self-valuation.
Mhm.
I guess I see Wentworth as somebody who is both, in the beginning especially, as somebody who's both very arrogant and then also very insecure. So he comes in and in 1814 after the war, and he's like, okay, I finally made it. My plan worked. I'm rich and everybody loves me. I'll never be rejected again. And then he sees Mr. Elliot and it's like, oh, wait, I still wasn't born into this. I still don't have, I still don't have that class status that someone who is deeply connected to Anne's family would have. But then Anne gets to tell him she doesn't care about that.
Right? So she gets to show that wasn't
right.
her motivation.
That's not what it was the whole time.
Yeah,
it was just about the practicality.
That's such a brilliant point.
Yeah.
I never thought about that before. And his jealousy of Mr. Elliot.
So it's like Mr. Elliot is like, it represents what this is my interpretation. Of course, it's not spelled out in the novel, but that Mr. Elliot represents what Wentworth has been striving to be and never can be. And never should be, because he's usually quite a lot nicer than that.
Yeah, they both kind of reject that. And Anne, in thinking these could have been my friends, I could be with people of substance that I love, not in this system where all we value is class. And our lives are and our conversations, are very dry and don't have that depth, and we don't have these emotional connections. I love that point. I love that motivation versus jealousy. I never thought of that before. I always just saw, another dog has my toy and now I want my toy back, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that's an invalid reading. It certainly does, that's there too.
Right? Male,
jealousy is part of what makes him notice her again.
Yes,
even
exactly.
from the beginning, from the first introduction of Mr. Elliot at Lyme, which I also had to cut, sadly.
Oh no!
Because in my script, Mr. Elliot is double cast with Charles Musgrove, and I thought it would be too confusing.
Oh yeah, it would be tough
to have Mr. Elliot come on there and then not say anything, but also not be Charles Musgrove. I sort of feel like he has to be dialogue to establish that he's a different person, and I couldn't figure out how to make that work. Plus, it was getting really long.
Oh no, I totally get it. I totally get it. I was going to say something else, but now I have to go down the rabbit hole of, was it necessary to double cast just because you were there were too many characters and you were afraid that no one had a troupe that big, kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think I tend to like aesthetically plays that are more economical in terms of the way they use actors. I was in a 25 actor version of Pride and Prejudice, which actually still had some double casting. I enjoyed the experience immensely, but I think I tend to prefer a more pared down style in theater. Plus, it's a lot more affordable, and almost no one writes large cast plays anymore unless it's a Broadway musical. So I envisioned it originally for 10 people, and that is what the current draft is as well. I have done a couple of readings with 8 people, which required just some minor cuts, but that sort of the size of the roles became more unbalanced. Some of them got really big and some of them not so big. So I felt like the 10-person version was my preference. I actually just recently had a conversation with the gentleman who's going to produce and direct the play as soon as the New York Theater opens, saying that, because of the kind of financial uncertainty and the restrictions around social distancing, both in the audience and also in the dressing rooms and things like that, and not knowing how that's all going to be, we might try to do it with a smaller cast. And I said, this director, Eric Tucker, is a genius, and I have seen him do incredible things with tiny casts and like people shifting character mid-scene and making it completely clear and funny and entertaining and not gimmicky. So I said, I couldn't figure out how to do it in a way that I liked with less than 10 people, but I bet you can. I trust you. So we'll see what happens. I don't know I've only done staged readings up to now. It hasn't had a premiere, my script. So.
Okay. No, understandable. And I imagine that double casting need pulls together some features of 2 characters and juxtaposes them in a way you didn't think of. Like all of a sudden, this man who plays both Charles Musgrove and Walter Elliot is sort of like a blank there, where it's men who are not interesting to Anne. Yeah. She's going through a world where it's the same guy, every face is the same guy, and it's
I love that. It can be, it is interesting to sort of play with those ideas that either having a sort of similarity in their role or having a big contrast. I think that adds to the pleasure of the experience
Yeah.
as a viewer to
I would be
see that
so into that.
versatility.
I would be
I
excited.
also I made the Harvilles a little bit older than they are in the book, and I have them double cast with Sir Walter and Lady Russell. So
Oh, okay.
this warm, unpretentious family that Anne has this really intimate relationship is also these sort of cold and
Yeah.
austere people.
Which it
That
gets to
she has
highlight
more
the range of the actors, right? And like, oh, you could see the power of the acting. It's the same guy, but it's a totally different person. I would just really enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, and there's also a moment which I think is funny. I'm not sure if it reads for other people, but at the White Hart Inn toward the end, when Charles is looking out the window and seeing Mr. Elliot and Mrs. Clay talking together, I have him say, "Oh, he's a really handsome man."
That's awesome. Gosh, what was I going to say? I was just going to mention, Mr. Knightley getting jealous of Frank Churchill, and that's when he realizes he loves Emma.
Yeah,
Those push and pull forces must.
that's interesting.
Well,
And I think of Mr. Knightley as being somebody who's quite emotionally mature. So
yes,
if even he has jealousy, I guess it's okay for Frederick to have jealousy too.
Yeah, yes. When I said he was like a dog with a toy, I was like, I should probably walk that back. I just meant territorial, right?
No, I get it. Yeah. It is interesting. One thing that I've noticed as I've closely read the novel to work on this project, Anne somehow gets prettier and more attractive over the course of the novel, and there's no apparent cause for that except sort of Jane Austen saying so. I mean,
sea wind,
the sea breeze, right? But I think my interpretation of that is that she is less depressed. That she's more available to people after seeing Wentworth again after 8 years. It's like she was in this sort of stasis, and then seeing him again is very traumatic, but it also kind of allows her to be free to entertain the idea of being with someone else, which I don't think she's ever done this whole time.
Right.
Because she really does start to have some feelings for Captain Benwick.
Yes. I think that's
or
true.
At least a desire to see him again and talk with him about books again.
The prequel to a feeling that makes her remember the feeling, right? Like, no, I know.
And Mr. Elliot, although she is, she's suspicious of him, she entertains the idea of marrying him at least.
Yeah, she has that moment where she sees herself as her mother, right? Lady of Kellynch and it was so bewitching. But then the spell was immediately broken because she realized you'd have to be married to Mr. Elliot, which is a real parallel to the Harris Bigwither situation.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
that's an exact parallel.
Yeah,
imagine Austen thinking, I could have all of this, I could secure all of this for my future happiness, but
or Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Collins.
Yeah. I guess the charm of the parish and the chickens and the cows. To be fair, I guess Elizabeth was never really chasing that lifestyle either. That's so funny. Yeah, so I think hearing this adaptation process is so interesting, and I'm wondering to tie that into other adaptations of Persuasion. Now that you've gone through the unique experience, which very few people on the planet have, of having written a script or a screen, not a screenplay, but a play. When you watch other adaptations of Persuasion, how do you feel? How do you relate to it? Do you start to judge their decisions or question your own, or how does that work?
Yeah, I guess I do. I think, well, I mean, I like the script that I've written. I feel pretty. I feel like it is part of a good part of myself, and so I think I'm probably more inclined to than most people to sort of quibble with editorial decisions that other writers make in adapting the story, which is fine. I try to take the Anne Elliot attitude. It's okay for them to be the way they are, and it's okay for me to be the way I am.
It's not a zero-sum game. We need all the adaptations we can get.
Right. So, I'll be interested to see what the new movie version that's coming out.
Oh, that's right. There's a new one coming too. Yeah.
I don't know when. They just announced the leads.
That's right. Yeah, they just announced the casting. It looks great. The cast they chose is really exciting.
Yeah. I prefer the 1995 version of the filmed versions that currently exist. I think I have some quibbles with the script, but the cast is lovely, and the costumes and cinematography are lovely. They really captured something beautiful about it.
The warmth and the hominess, and just Charles Musgrove sitting around in his stocking feet, in front of the fire, is draws you in and makes you feel like you're amongst friends. And I absolutely love that adaptation.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. Yeah. One thing that is peculiar, which I mentioned, I can't remember if it was before we started recording or not, is that both the 95 and 2007 filmed versions refer to it as a marriage proposal that Anne rejected, which seems to me to be considerably lowering the stakes from what Austen wrote.
Yes.
And I can't think of really an explanation for that. Because of course in the novel, Anne accepted the proposal and a short period of exquisite felicity followed. Yeah. And, we don't even know what happened during that short period of exquisite felicity. And then she jilted him, right? Which was a kind of, it was socially acceptable for women to break it off at that time period, but it was not, it was a negative reflection on her character by most outside observers, I think, if they knew about it. Right. And certainly more hurtful from his perspective.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think we need to see more Persuasion adaptations that include the broken engagement.
Include the broken engagement, you cowards. I suspect it just takes more time to explain, and everybody's streamlining. But I think you make a really important point that they're so close to perfect happiness that when she does withdraw it, the sting is even more devastating to him. He can't get past it. And I think that's a really good point for me to mull over, because I often forget that as well, that they were for a short time engaged, and that Sir Walter refused to do anything for them pecuniarily.
Right. Which is interesting too. It's all sort of vague in the way that Austen narrates it. But yes, he refused to do anything for his daughter. What does that mean? Presumably that he is not going to give her access to her money that's been settled on her while she's still underage. I think my understanding of the legal system is that, the three sisters each have £10,000 from their mother's estate that they will get when they're 21 or before, if their parents want to give it to them. So, Anne is 19. He doesn't want to give her money. And then, of course, by the end of the novel, he doesn't have it to her. So he doesn't have it to give to her. So he's actually in debt to Captain Wentworth, among other folks. But yeah, it's interesting. One thing that is sort of lovely with regard to Austen's equivocation about this very fraught political issue of whether children can marry without their parents' consent is that Anne insists that Lady Russell is a mother figure to her, but she's actually not, right? And the actual living parent that Anne has does not absolutely forbid the marriage. He's cold about it. But so I think it seems to me that for Austen's original readers, perhaps Anne's decision would be a more black and white issue if she actually had a parent that put their foot down. But because Lady Russell is merely a parent figure, there's this ambiguity that Austen's playing with. It's interesting.
So here's Sir Walter screwing everything up again, because he can't he can't just cut it off and then Wentworth can come back with the money, right?
In that case, yeah, exactly. Wentworth might not have even have been as mad.
Yeah. You're like, okay, you're the boss.
Right.
Wow.
Instead, he's just rude about it.
Yeah. There's so much I hadn't thought about. Sometimes it really pays to just talk it over with another person, and all of these things come to light, and you're like, how could I have missed this fascinating point?
There's always more.
There's always more.
There's always more, yeah.
Hence the podcast, right?
Yeah. Another quibble that I have with the 1995 version, which I really love, is that there's the Charles Hayter subplot is so small. It's again, you have to condense and so forth. The movie's only like 2 hours and 10 minutes long or something, if I'm remembering correctly. But Anne overhears Henrietta and Louisa walking together outside the window, and there's something like Henrietta doesn't want to marry Charles Hayter anymore, and Louisa's making her, which is not the impression I get from the book. Although that is, maybe that is a valid reading of the book, But it seems to me that what the narrator is saying in that section is that Henrietta wants to marry Charles. Henrietta still loves Charles Hayter, and she's feeling embarrassed about how she was temporarily inconstant by flirting with Wentworth. And Louisa helps her find the courage to stand up to Mary and go after what her heart truly desires, which is a much more kind reading of Louisa than Louisa is making Henrietta get back with Charles Hayter because she wants to have Captain Wentworth all to herself, right? I think one of the things that is kind of lovely and interesting about Persuasion is that the really bad people are not serious antagonists in plot terms, while the people who do provide obstacles in plot terms are fairly lovely. You could say it. You could see sort of comparing it to Pride and Prejudice structurally. Lady Russell plays a similar role to Lady Catherine, and Louisa, plays a similar role to Caroline Bingley as the rival, or Lydia as sort of the inconvenient teenager. But they're both, they're both acting rightly according to their lights. They're both doing their best.
Right?
Yeah. And then sort of the obnoxious characters, so Walter and his retinue, are really they're almost comic relief. They're not right. They're sort of part of the furniture and part of the world that is set up in this negative way. But they don't. Anne's conflict and Wentworth's conflict is mainly, I think, with Lady Russell and Louisa and each other. And I like thinking about how Austen maybe increasingly, I don't know, humanized her antagonists, or it doesn't seem to be, whether children can get married without their parents' consent is not a hot topic or controversial issue for most people that I know. But it really was a moral dilemma in Austen's world. And I think, and as you said, it ties into the sort of larger moral dilemma about how much love is enough to make a marriage valid, and how much is it appropriate to consider financial security, questions of, integrity and what it means to be a person.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean,
it's
that's
not black and white.
Life. When you have conflict in real life, it's with someone else who isn't evil. This is not a Marvel movie. There's no big bad, and so when I think that's part of the power of Austen, is navigating this in a way that's fair for everybody, and who we support and who goes too far for morality and needs to be checked. You know what I mean? Or not get that brass ring. Whatever.
That's one of the interesting things in Emma too, which I just reread, is that we really never get a final assessment on Frank Churchill. He's he's just left as a question mark. And Mr. Knightley and Emma and Mrs. Weston, they all talk it over, and they all have different opinions that are mostly tied to their own their own psychological issues,
their outcomes. How embarrassed they feel about their own behavior.
Right. But it's I don't think Emma, she doesn't have his number at the end the way Elizabeth, she has Wickham dead to rights. She knows exactly who he is, and Lady Catherine and all the other unpleasant people in Pride and Prejudice. There's a kind of clarity. And same in Sense and Sensibility, those two earlier novels.
Sense and Sensibility really does kind of have the person who's inscrutably evil, and in Fanny and John's, whose mother is it? It's Fanny's mother.
Mrs. Ferrars.
Yes. Mrs. Ferrars. Yes. Is just a dragon, right?
Yes, she is.
And perhaps obviously that came at a period of Austen's life where she was younger and she needed a convenient baddie. And perhaps as she gets older, her bad guys are, like you were saying, they're people who are in the way. And social conventions.
Well, and it's also it's a reflection perhaps of the lead character's greater maturity in Persuasion, that they're not right. Anne isn't disturbed by her father and Elizabeth not approving of the marriage, right? Yeah. She has the wisdom to get over that part pretty quickly.
Right.
It's
and
Lady Russell
who stopped caring about their approbation. It doesn't have, she doesn't get it, but she also doesn't assign any worth to it, because these folks, morally, intellectually, you know, there's
Mhm.
nothing there. They're just like blank spaces, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, he's a baronet and a handsome man, and the Sir Walter who unites both these blessings is the object of his own fervent admiration.
Right. Right.
I was just reading that this morning and I was like, that is the best slam of all time. Look, Kevin, my husband was like, what's the first line of Persuasion? And I was like, gosh darn it. I only got the first few letters, right? I only got the first few words of it. And I was like, it says something like Sir Walter of Kellynch. But then when you read it all through, the slam is at the end with a lot. It's one of these Austen sentences with many, many semicolons. So you're getting there, getting there, getting there, getting there. Oh, that's really funny. But it's not one you can just toss off your cuff, right? Like, yeah. Even the Emma, the first line in Emma, which is so good, kind of goes on kind of a long time before.
That's right. That's right. And then
not as pithy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And then the turn comes at the end.
It comes at the end. That
must be a rhetorical term for that, but I don't know what it is.
I'm sure there's some Latin term for like the stinger, the kicker, right? And,
right.
But you know, Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, those are immortal words, right? Like even at the beginning, immortality. So that one, and then you turn to Sense and Sensibility. You weren't really, and you know, Mansfield Park, it comes like halfway down the first page. There are certainly not so many rich men in the world that there are pretty women to deserve them. And she would just like move that up to the top. You know, that would be the other immortal opening line. Not to criticize. I mean, the way it is perfect, but you know, that one gets buried and you just start getting confused about the financial details. And then you're there and then you're like, oh, I get it. But yeah, anyway, not to talk about that forever. And then Sense and Sensibility, you know, family of Dashwoods long been settled in Sussex. Ooh, I'm hooked.
Right. Yeah. You hear about 3 generations before.
Yeah. But that was so typical of her time that probably didn't strike her as, you know, anything she needed to worry about or fix.
Right. And I do think Sense and Sensibility is the most conventional of the novels stylistically, right?
Absolutely.
It is the one that seems to be, and of course it's the one she ended up choosing to publish first. I guess she'd made other attempts, but it's like she was writing to the marketplace a little bit in that one, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
You know, she got it out of her system writing Northanger Abbey, skewering all this. And then she's like, I'm going to make, you know, let me do the conventional one and try to get successful. I love that point. I completely agree with you. In the dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, it has some, you know, I love Mrs. Jennings and Fanny Dashwood, and there are some very uniquely Austen idiosyncratic elements to it. But to me, it seems like Eleanor is almost, to me, a kind of paragon 18th century heroine.
Yes.
And I think she escapes that because we have the free and direct discourse, and we do see a little bit more of the workings of her mind than we would in a more typical novel of that period. Yeah, it's sort of the one that gets the closest to being just regular.
I've told this story on the podcast before, but I actually picked it as a book club book in a group which was not an Austen book club at all. And I was like, oh, it's such a great book. You guys are going to love it. And then I started reading it. It had been a little while. And I thought, because it does, of all of them, I think it is the hardest to get into if you're not comfortable with the language. It is a more stereotypical early 19th century novel language-wise. And it was a struggle for some people. And I was like, whoops, sorry.
Interesting. Yeah, but it's interesting that she apparently she was working on that and Pride and Prejudice at the same time in this period in her early 20s, and also the draft of Northanger Abbey. You know, if we can trust Cassandra's recollection, it's funny. You know, the note that Cassandra wrote much later suggests that Northanger Abbey was drafted the latest of the 3, which seems. I'm a sort of. I also find that a little bit difficult to believe. Yeah. Right? It feels like such youthful work, and it has so much more of the tone of the juvenilia. But I don't know. Who knows?
It so does have the tone of the juvenilia. You could just see in the bones of it when you're reading it. You know, this hilarity, like every sentence being hysterical, and then written perhaps over top of it. If we are to believe Collins Hemingway's hypothesis that it was juvenilia first and then revamped into an adult novel, and some of those passages that are so hectically comic were from an earlier period. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, for those listening, it was a session I attended at JASNA So if you go back and listen to the JASNA recap, you can like hear more about that. But that was like, yeah, it blew my mind. And then he was up in front of God and everybody, and he was like, it doesn't work for me. And we were like, all right. All right. Okay. All right.
Slow down.
If, you know, you could just, that part you may have just considered keeping to yourself. I don't need to know whether you think Northern Abbey works or not.
Yeah.
You know, whatever.
I like it. I do think Pride and Prejudice is probably the most accessible. I usually tell people to start with that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
And it's great too.
Obviously,
yeah.
And it's a classic for a reason. Cool. Well, I think that this has been a fantastic conversation. Rose, it was so amazing to have you on, to talk through all this stuff with you, to have the conversations that we're having on Twitter, but even better because we can riff and we can just see each other and we can have this sort of flow. And I'm just beyond thankful that you were willing to do this. I know it's kind of, you took a leap on someone you only knew from 280 characters. You know what I mean?
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
It was so much fun. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much again for coming. This was so awesome. And I really, really appreciate it. And I know Maggie appreciates it too. And she sends her apologies. She wasn't able to be here.
Oh, I would love to chat with her sometime too. But it's been great. I really enjoyed getting to meet you and have a conversation.
Yeah. And so I will do our normal sign off at the end of our podcast, which is, we have delighted you all long enough.